Ladies, gentlemen, and Nightfarers of all ages, with Nightreign now out for a couple of days, players have been diving in further and deeper into the game. While some people are still looking for their first win on the first Night Lord, others have multiple Night Lords down, and aside from just people having more experience with this style of game, or of course skill differences, there's also a ton of RNG in the game on what you actually get. But one of the most important factors to success is an understanding of the character that you choose to play and the weapons that you choose to wield, because some parts of the weapons are simple and some parts are very much not obvious unless you dive into stuff like the visual codex in the Roundtable Hold. And even then, there's some funkiness going on top of that. So today we're going to go over the concept of what the best weapons can be in the game. We'll talk more specifically about the best sort of options for each character and what to look for on the different Nightfarers, and then we'll also be talking about how to maximize your chances of finding these higher tier weapons and making them stronger while on a run. First up then, to sort of open everything up today, I want to talk about how to actually get all of the best weapons on a more consistent basis. Obviously, at the end of the day, this game is heavily based on RNG, and if you get bad rolls, bad randomness, then you will have a tough time, simple as that. But if you have the knowledge about where good weapons come from, or even how to make a weapon better yourself in the middle of a run, then you can put yourself into a position to have a higher chance of just better results in general. That said, generally speaking, higher quality loot has a higher chance of showing up the higher level that you are personally. So the first thing is level up. Aside from that, higher quality rewards come from more difficult bosses, and generally you want to avoid those right at the start of a run. What I mean is that power is a sort of snowball effect in Nightreign. The faster you can be strong enough to kill a difficult boss, the quicker you will get the power from that hard boss. And the faster that you can do that encounter, the more of these harder bosses you can kill in a single run, which gives you the highest chances at the best stuff dropping. The specific bosses that you want to really make sure that you pick on and pick up are all the bosses that are marked by skulls once you walk past them on the map when you have a look here, and these also get marked on the second day. These tend to be quite big boys, but then also, of course, most every location on the map does have a boss inside of it too. A big part of this is knowing what type of weapons that you're hunting for, which we will get into later in the video, but the map actually has a fair amount of details that can help you plan what you want to do. Generally speaking, all enemies in the game, the way that they work, will drop items that are somewhat relevant to them. If you kill a big fire monk based boss, you're probably going to get a big fiery weapon as a reward. As well, if you know the Night Lord is weak to fire, you want to look for a fire weapon as a result, and to do so, you can just look for the fire element symbol on areas on the map. For example, on this first one, the Night Lord is weak to holy, so if we look at our map here, you'll see that this camp here gives you holy damage items. As well, it has a chance of dropping bows if you look at the details screen. If you're playing Ironeye and want a bow, that means camps that have the bow symbol are probably places you want to visit. Similarly, for the places with the seal and staff symbols for when you're playing Recluse or Revenant, or I guess if you just want to have spells as utility in general. So this is how you use the map to plan your route based on what things are when you load in. The other main things that you can do is 1. Check in with merchants. You can also see the merchant symbol when looking at map details to know if there are merchants around different points of interest and generally where they are, but merchants often have a few weapons within their stock, including some purple rarity options to choose from. This one right here that I'm using as an example has a purple rarity weapon that I'm going to be recommending highly for one of the characters, so that's just an example of the fact that merchants can have very good things. As well, the last thing that I want to talk about in this section is how to make weapons better that otherwise might not be that great. And the main method of this is smithing stones. This is how you make your starting weapon stay competitive into the later sections of an expedition, and it's how you can make even the most common of weapons actually have really solid stats by the end. A regular smithing stone 1, can be found just generally through the world, enemies can drop them, and they can be purchased from pretty much any merchant. This can be used to make a white quality weapon turn into a blue quality weapon. Smithing Stone 2 are specifically attached to the mine locations on your map, which have the mine shaft symbol. There are a couple of these generally, and if you go in here and go all the way to the bottom, you will find a troll enemy. Defeat the troll, and one of the options you will be offered is a Smithing Stone 2. This is used to upgrade a blue rarity weapon into a purple rarity weapon, so if you have a really solid blue weapon, this should be a high priority thing for you to do within your run. Then the final stage of that is if you have the Crater Shifting Earth event active, the big volcano in the center of the map. You can delve in through that, and then at the very end of the area is an anvil that you can use to upgrade one weapon to legendary quality, which is the highest quality you can get. Generally speaking, Shifting Earth events are really high value regardless of which one it is, as they have lots of bosses and general enemies in a relatively densely packed area. This applies to all of the events like this in general, but the Crater specifically is the one that can let you upgrade a weapon to legendary. Now, with all of that bit covered, it's time to talk about the weapons themselves, with a couple of notes before we get into specifics. In Nightreign, there is no such thing as a universally perfect weapon for every character, because while some of them have good skills or good passives, when using them for the actual purpose of swinging or spellcasting in the case of stabs and seals, each character has different scaling stats, and you can see this in the visual codex of the Roundtable Hold. The Raider has an S in strength and not too much of anything else, so if there is a weapon that is fantastic but it's a dex weapon, that won't be fantastic for that character, so it's better to talk about them in the context of each character individually. That said, there are a few things to note that will also help you have a greater understanding here. First is that every character's starting weapon has S scaling in their main stat, except for Wylder, who gets mixed strength and dexterity scaling as that fits his stats better, and Guardian, who only gets B strength scaling on his halberd because they want you to play him more as a tank anyways. The point of saying this is that for the most part, the actual base starting weapons for each character are quite good for those characters to use. On top of the fact that most Nightfarers get unique movesets or animations with their starting weapon type too, which are their preferred weapons. The well-matched scaling to their attributes gives them a lot of potential, but obviously when you first start playing, they have no passives, no real power, anything like that, and generally speaking, they also have less base attack power than any other weapon of the same typing category. And they also, of course, are white rarity at the start of a run. That said, as you start to build up relics, you can get ones that apply bonuses to your starting weapon. You can find smithing stones in the run to upgrade your starting weapon. You can change the damage type of your starting weapon to match whatever Night Lord weakness you want to, and once you are able to make your starting weapon stronger like this, it can genuinely become one of the best items to have with you in an expedition, as long as, of course, you make a point of upgrading it with smithing stones and the relics, because a purple quality starting weapon can be extremely strong compared to the other options for a number of the Nightfarers. Past that, as a general statement, attack power of weapons scales with their quality level. Legendary weapons, the ones with an orange border that require level 10, are usually stronger than an epic weapon, which is the purple border that requires level 7. These are stronger than blue border weapons, which are stronger than the white border weapons, and there is a bit more nuance to it than this, which we'll get into, but especially if you are comparing weapons within the same typing, like a straight sword with another straight sword, the higher quality one will generally result in more damage. When comparing weapons inside of expeditions as a whole, you can use the attack power metric that the game shows you as a bit of a shorthand, as this shows you how the weapon will scale with you actively at the moment. But what it doesn't take into account is the different speeds of different movesets of different weapons. So a colossal weapon will generally have a higher attack power rating than a straight sword, even if the straight sword would do more damage per second overall, because the colossal weapon hits harder in a singular hit. And so attack power is useful to look at, but it's good to be aware of its shortcomings where it fails, and to know the weapons a little bit better before actually going into the expedition itself. And of course, to be aware of what you're looking for on each Nightfarer. With that said, let's talk about exactly that. As a general rule of thumb, because of the existing stat splits, some of the weapon types are a bit awkward to recommend just in general. If you want high strength scaling weapons, you want great hammers, great axes, or colossal weapons. For a mix of strength with a little bit of dex, you want colossal swords and hammers, and these will also scale with the main strength characters as well. For the more dexterity heavy characters, daggers, thrusting swords, katanas, and bows all have S scaling on most of their options, which makes them great in general. And curved swords, scythes, whips, and claws mostly have A dexterity scaling as well, making these solid options for the mainly dexterity characters. For specifically Wylder, who is the only one that benefits much from a quality split, which is a mix of strength and dexterity, great swords, axes, halberds, great spears, and fists are all generally good. There are other options, but these are the ones that are weighted more towards strength than dexterity, which is definitely definitely more fitting for Wylder's specific stats. Unlike regular Elden Ring, any melee weapon with split scaling will always be weighted very heavily towards the main physical stat, so strength or dexterity, and then it will just get a little bit in its magic stat, meaning faith or intelligence. Arcane is sort of in the middle ground, where most weapons that have Arcane as a secondary scaling have it as a C, maybe a B. What this means is that the vast majority of melee weapons are not great at all on the int and faith main scaling Nightfarers, which would be the Recluse and the Revenant. There is no entire weapon type to recommend for int or faith outside of the obvious thing, which is staves and seals, but of course those are somewhat limited because you don't have unlimited FP, unless of course you manage to get there through just good items and good build creation through the expedition. But of course that just means that general weapon types aren't necessarily recommendable for this. There are still specific weapons that do scale well for these characters, so I will mention them in a moment. That said, it's also worth noting while we're here that all staffs in the game have S int scaling and all seals have S faith scaling, so there's no mixed int faith options. There's no having like a strength scaling seal like the Clawmark seal was in the base game. Sorceries are purely int scaling and incantations are purely faith scaling. This means they scale pretty badly for everything that isn't Recluse, Revenant, or specifically Duchess, who actually does have a int scaling, and it's also worth noting that while this doesn't really appear on your weapons anywhere like regular Elden Ring, status buildups do scale with your arcane stat specifically, but unlike base Elden Ring, this applies to all statuses, so even things like Scarlet Rot buildup and Frostbite buildup are better for characters that have good arcane scaling. As well as we dive into this, any common weapon can roll in the right way to make it stronger than a legendary weapon is. But that requires a ton of RNG to have it happen, so in here I will be mostly focusing on the weapons that are a bit more set. But if I say great swords are good for a character, then you RNG roll like a Flamberge with a great passive and a perfect Ash of War, that can easily end up overtaking the value of some of the more specific recommendations I'm making here. So this is much more meant to be a guideline rather than hard set rules. Moving on to specific character choices then. Wylder best scales with strength, but it still has a B in dexterity, which is great. He has multiple C's and everything else. This means that Wylder is sort of a jack of all trades. He can use most any weapon quite effectively, with a slight leaning towards the more physical side of things and a slight leaning towards strength within that. Great swords are his jam, but realistically any weapon that has mixed strength and dexterity scaling will do very well on this character. Even things that have mixed strength or dexterity with one of the magic stats. Short swords are great on him because a lot of them have double B physical scaling, and especially the ornamental straight swords are really strong for Wylder in my opinion, because when you activate the skill and then get the super strong charged heavy attack as well, that can do nearly 1200 damage at level 10 in a single use with nothing else boosting it, not even things like charged attack boosters, and that is sort of nuts compared to what a lot of the damage is in Nightreign. Some other great options are Dark Moon Greatsword if you find it especially, as this applies a magic damage negation debuff which can boost the damage of your teammates as well. Blasphemous Blade is a classically very strong weapon that matches Wylder's scaling, and a really solid option is the Mariah's Executioner Blade, because especially as this has B strength scaling, C dexterity scaling, and also B arcane scaling, which is an incredible match with Wylder's stats, and not only does the weapon skill do good damage, but it also has a relatively low FP cost. That said, Wylder is the Nightfarer with the most freedom of weapon choice. If something drops that is a classically strong Elden Ring weapon, he's the one that can get good use out of it even if no one else in your party can. And if you don't find any crazy special weapons like that, you can of course always just use smithing stones to upgrade a weapon that has otherwise good matching scaling. After him we have Guardian. Guardian's whole deal is shields mainly, but for weapons his main scaling stat is strength. For him you want to collect a nice big meaty great shield ideally, and then for his main hand weapon you want something that can attack while guarding. Guardian's big thing is to try and be the tank for the party. You will want to collect as many things that make you get more enemy attention as you can, and so you will want to build your offense towards things that you can do while still using a shield in your left hand, and towards things like guard counters, even possibly where it makes sense to do so at least. In my opinion, the best way to do this with Guardian is to keep yourself mostly using weapons that are like spears, great spears, and halberds. That said, regular spears don't scale great with strength, which is our main offensive stat, so great spears are better for this than regular spears, and having generally similar scaling to halberds, so for the most part, great spears and halberds are what you want to aim for on this character, with some specifically strong options among them being Serpent Hunter for just massive physical damage,
damage, Mogwin's Sacred Spear for decent scaling, as well as having bleed status buildup, which you can apply from behind your shield, so that makes it awesome for Guardian, but avoid Tree Spear among the Grey Spears, as that is more of a dexterity leaning weapon. As far as halberds, things like the Golden Halberd to let you apply Golden Vow, or the Battlefield Standard to let you buff yourself and allies as well, are also extremely good options, because as generally speaking, Guardian is not going to be your high damage character. Giving him weapons that make your allies stronger instead is not a bad idea by any means, but you want to avoid halberds like the Ripple Crescent Halberd, which is pure arcane scaling, or the Guardian Sword Spear, which is mostly dexterity scaling. Next up we have Ironeye, and from here things start to get a little bit simpler and more straightforward. His preferred weapon type is bows, and he is quite proficient with them. He's got an A in dexterity and a B in arcane, so bows in general are great, but they have pretty similar attack power to each other in general, with the exception of the ones that have mixed damage types like fire damage or magic damage. As well, the Serpent Bow specifically has natural poison buildup, which is great especially as Ironeye has great arcane scaling as well. So this makes it a great match of a bow if you happen to find it, or if you can get your hands on a bow that has any type of status buildup on it, you will have a really great time especially. If you want to use melee with Ironeye, anything that has dex scaling on it is great, but dexterity and arcane mixes are the ideal choice. This is things like Rivers of Blood or Reduvia, and especially Eleonora's Pole Blade, all of which have not only great scaling and bleed buildup application, which is strong, but also just have really solid weapon skills available too. Bloody Hellas is also quite good generally, but the skill isn't fantastic on it, or even something like the Antspur Rapier for brought buildup on a dex scaling weapon is awesome too. Outside of that, anything with high dexterity scaling, like I mentioned earlier in the video, is good for him, and especially anything that is normally heavy dexterity scaling that randomly rolls with status buildup on it when it drops, so keep an eye out for those kinds of weapons as well. Then we have the Duchess, who surprisingly is actually A scaling in intelligence as her best stat, and then B in dexterity and faith, C in arcane, and D in strength. This means strength scaling weapons are just straight out of the mix, you don't want to use them. Status buildup is okay because of the arcane scaling, but not anywhere close to as good as the characters with better arcane scaling. Then that leaves us with the remaining 3 stats. Weirdly enough, this means that staves and seals are actually decent on Duchess. She can use spells just fine, though they would be weaker than they will be with the main casters. So she sits in a little bit of an odd middle ground between dexterity and magic. This means that the amount of weapons that are really good for her are quite limited, mostly limited to things that only have dexterity or intelligence mixed scaling, and even then most of those weapons are weighted more towards the dex than the int, which means that she just sort of tends to scale relatively poorly with weapons in general. However, with that said, there are some specific ones that you want to make sure that you grab and use if they drop during a run for Duchess. These are Glintstone Chris, which is actually quite exceptional for the Duchess specifically, being a dex and int scaling dagger, which is her preferred weapon type, and having a relatively strong weapon skill on top of that too. Generally speaking, daggers are just very good for her too with her unique moveset with them. There's also specific weapons like Wing of Astel as an option if that drops, matching scaling and great weapon skill. Moonveil is alright, but weighted more toward dexterity than int in this game, which is a bit unfortunate for the character. Bastard Stars is a very solid flail if you are into that too, especially as the passive it has in this game makes it create extra explosive pops on hits sometimes, which actually adds up quite a lot of damage once it adds up. The Crystal Spear and Rotten Crystal Spear are also great options for this character, the second one especially as it's an int and dex scaling weapon that has Scarlet Rot buildup too, which is always nice to have as a choice. Next up then is the Raider, a personal favorite of mine, and generally speaking he just wants strength above all else. His preferred weapons are actually multiple types, being great hammers, great axes, and colossal weapons. He is great with any of those if you're just looking for something to use, something functional, but colossal weapons are the best option for him because of his unique preferred weapon moveset and how that works out. This makes colossal weapon swings pretty much the same speed as the other large weapon types instead of being much slower, so that combined with colossal weapons all having incredible strength scaling makes that weapon type a no-brainer perfect match if you find a good one while playing Raider. It said things like the Prelate's Inferno Crozier is great in general, the Rotten Staff is a great Scarlet Rot application option for him, Dragon Greatclaw is solid as well, Giza's Wheel is a good bleed buildup option, but it loses out on Raider's special moveset while using it, which makes it a little bit worse. And then the big one is of course the legendary colossal weapon, the Axe of Godfrey, which is sort of insane in Nightreign, honestly. The passive effect of this gives you a buff when you do a charged heavy attack. This buff is just a 20% attack power increase to your character as a whole for around 15 seconds afterwards, including the damage of the charged attack itself. So even if you aren't focused on doing charged attacks repeatedly, if you only do one occasionally, you can still get this big buff applied to the rest of your damage. As well, the weapon skill is both damage and a roar, and the roar applies a self-attack buff and changes the strong attack animations. But funnily enough, for Raider specifically, the animations after the roar are actually weaker than his normal charged strong attack animations because of his preferred unique moveset, so this weapon is great, but only use the skill itself on it if you are focusing more on light attacks than on heavies. Again, great axes and great hammers also work for this guy, and the higher tier ones of those types will be solid, but colossal weapons are overall the best choice. Then we have 3 characters left, which are all a little bit sad and simple, honestly. Revenant pretty much only has Faith as an offensive stat, because most of her offense is supposed to be from her skills themselves, or from spells with your limited FP pool. This means that Sacred Seals and Incantations are obviously your best option overall, and very, very few melee weapons have value. Obviously, it's better to have something than nothing, but only a couple of melee weapons actually scale decently on this character. Specifically, these are her own starting weapon, which is a fist weapon with S Faith scaling and extended range compared to most fist weapons. It's really actually quite a solid weapon, especially if you build some upgrades onto starting weapon as part of your relic setup for the character. Outside of that, you're just hoping to luck out and find specific things like the Coated Sword, which is an S Faith scaling short sword, or the Cipher Pata, which is another S scaling extended range fist weapon, but just with generally higher attack power than your starting weapon option. Aside from that, you can get away with anything that has at least some bit of faith scaling on it, but seeing as most of them have C or D faith scaling at best, you just won't get too much out of them on this character. As for the Recluse, she is S in int and faith, and not much of any other offensive attributes, and this means that she is sort of in the same boat as Revenant. She also gets super high effect from sorceries, so she gets massive benefit from sorceries and incantations, and she has some FP regen as a part of her character's kit, which makes spell use generally the main goal while playing Recluse. However, if you want an actual melee weapon, your best options are identical to the Revenant, being the Coated Sword, the Cipher Pata fist weapon, or if you can somehow get your hands on the Revenant starting fist weapon, as again, all of those have S scaling with Faith, which Recluse works great with. There are no equivalent weapons that are pure int scaling though, really, and so none of the options are great for Recluse outside of those either. But again, beggars can't be choosers, so at minimum you want to look for stuff that has some kind of int or faith scaling, as that tends to mean that you will be able to do decently with it on this character. Then finally we have the Executor, whose preferred weapon type is katanas, and whose scaling is straight up S in both dexterity and arcane. This means any dexterity weapons work great for the character. He even works great with bows, which I recommend having one on him, even if you don't use it as your main weapon. He also works great with status buildup thanks to the arcane scaling too. As a result, the list of specific particular weapons is actually identical to what I went over for Ironeye, as he has also dexterity and arcane scaling. The main difference is that the Executor just has better scaling in both of those stats, so it's the same group of weapons that you want to aim for, he just uses them even more efficiently. And of course, an extra special note that specifically Rivers of Blood is even better than it is on the Ironeye because of Executors having katana as his preferred weapon type. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Some tips on how to get better weapons in general on your runs, and then a relatively deep dive into which weapons you want to look for on each of the characters, which weapon types more generally, but then also some specific recommendations that are incredibly potent if you happen to come across them. I hope you've enjoyed this, and hopefully it helps you out on your continued expeditions in Elden Ring Nightreign. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage.
Goodbye.